Hello, everybody. My name's Harry Phillips, and I'm an attorney at Gibson, Dunn & Crutcher in Washington, D.C. I'm pleased to present this installment of the ABA Antitrust Section's Member Spotlight Series with Dr. Whitney Phillips, who is Utah's State Privacy Officer. Dr. Phillips, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Perhaps you can start by just explaining what your current role is. What exactly is a State Privacy Officer?
Well, this role was described in legislation last year in 2021 that passed. It was HB 243. And it created two positions. One of them is the Government Operations Privacy Officer, and one of them is the State Privacy Officer, which is my role. The Government Operations Privacy Officer is housed within the Department of Technology Services. And he, named Chris Bramwell, is providing support to all state agencies that are under the governor's office. So about 26 or 27 state agencies. And my position, the State Privacy Officer, is essentially over all other government entities that are not under the governor's office. And so it was a way to kind of divide the work, although we are working closely together. So my job is to help these local governments, which I've calculated to be about 1,000, increase their maturity of privacy, analyze their practices, and provide resources for them to increase their capacity for keeping data more protected.
And when you say local governments, what does that mean in practice? Who are you working with?
It's quite a range. Local governments include all local education agencies, which are districts and charter schools. There are about 150 so here in Utah. It also includes all public institutions of higher education, such as the University of Utah. And it includes cities, towns, counties, law enforcement within the cities and counties. It includes sewer districts and fire districts and cemetery districts. So very, very large institutions, all the way to very small, say a volunteer at a cemetery district with a $2,000 budget a year. So it's a pretty big scope.
And how long have you had this position?
I was confirmed by the Senate in December, just 2021. So just a few months now.
Is it common for states to have this kind of position, focusing on local governments in particular?
It's not common. It's not common to have a privacy officer at the state level at all. I know in 2021, a handful of states did, they had designated some type of chief privacy officer or state privacy officer. So it's becoming a lot more common, but to have this kind of large scope, I haven't heard of one, so not yet. I think I might be the first.
What was the idea? I mean, why the state of Utah decide that was something that it wanted?
Well, a few years ago, there was a company that had a contract with the state, and there was a promise of looking at real-time surveillance cameras across the Department of Transportation here, also public and private video surveillance cameras. And this company named Banjo at the time said that they would be able to intervene when there's a kidnapping, for example, or something that took place, and that they had artificial intelligence that would de-identify the information somehow and then let law enforcement know. So they were given a $20 million contract and looking at other contracts. And in 2020, I believe it was found that the owner of this company had, in his youth, had close ties to white supremacist groups and was even part of some criminal activity in his youth. And so the state auditor's office decided to look into the company to look at any algorithm rhythmic bias to see if there's any kind of bias built into that. And they did do a large review. There was a commission, a task force put together to look into the access of what Banjo had and what they did with this. It was determined that, in fact, it was more, the Banjo's services were not quite artificial intelligence. It was more of a nice dashboard of information. And so it did not meet the level of sophistication to be called artificial intelligence. And I say that all because this was a company that was given a lot of information and maybe shouldn't have had that much information. There were no subsequent cases that were reported of this technology being helpful in real life. And so this commission was put together and they advocated for HB 243, which did pass in 2021, so that there would be a point of contact for government to come to with privacy concerns and that kind of help. And so we're hoping to have privacy be more thought about in the beginning of a procurement process rather than an afterthought, having that be highlighted so that we don't face ourselves in that type of situation again.
So how did, switching gears a little bit, how did you personally come into this role? What's your background and how did you reach this position?
I fell into the role, which I'm learning from my other counterparts. They've kind of done the same thing, had the same experience. My background is in longitudinal data analysis and kind of large data sets. So I know data pretty well. I know how it moves and how it works and how it's not always as clean as we want it to be. And from that role, I was put in charge of federal and state accountability, looking at kind of, when you give a school a grade, for example, and that's usually done through metrics required in federal and state law. And a position came up as Chief Privacy Officer at the Board of Education, which is the Department of Education. We call it the Board of Education in Utah. And kind of fell into that role, knowing that there really wasn't any focus in school on privacy when I was going to school. It's just kind of naturally come about. So I served as Chief Privacy Officer for the State Board of Education, which included those 150 districts and charter schools, and grew a pretty great program. And so when this came along, they asked me to do it.
So what does your job involve day to day in terms of working with these agencies and monitoring their privacy practices?
Well, my first job right now is to kind of spread awareness that I exist, and this is helping. So thank you. I am getting to know these different government entities. I like to get to know them before I tell them what they should be doing. And in fact, next month is going to be very busy. I'll be attending conferences that are for Utah cities and towns, as well as Utah counties. So I think my job right now is to build relationships and get to know the world that they live in, the data that they collect and maintain. And I am right now very focused on data minimization, looking at compliance with record retention schedules governed by our Freedom of Information Act. We lovingly call GRAMA, Government Records Access and Management Act.
And so what kind of privacy, you mentioned data minimization, are there other privacy issues that have sort of occupied your time since you begun this role, and maybe talk a little bit about what the data minimization means?
Well, there should be different schedules on when you destroy data that you collect. And I think over the years, the cost of data maintenance and storage has decreased, as we all know. And so we've been kind of holding a lot of data, both personally and in the government. And so I am trying to advocate for compliance to when you're supposed to destroy information, because it's easier to secure and protect a smaller amount of data than having too much. And so that's kind of one thing I think that across the board, these large universities to these very small cemetery districts, that they can all learn from data minimization and destroying data that no longer has an administrative use.
Is there a particular part, particular local entity or part of the state government where you're seeing those risks like at the highest in terms of the data minimization, holding on to too much?
Sure. I'm not quite sure. That's something I want to look into. I've recently surveyed the larger organizations that have 50 or more employees, not organizations, but government entities, to assess their maturity of privacy using generally acceptable privacy principles. And it was a little concerning what was reported back, but of the 58% that responded, which is great for an optional survey, I found that the top 10 of these 350 were local education agencies. And I think that's due to the fact that they were given support by myself and a team when working with the Board of Education to help increase their maturity. But the bottom 10 were counties, a few counties and cities, and that is alarming to me.
Why is that particularly alarming?
Counties and cities have a lot of information. They collect a lot, and wherever anybody is, any government entity is, I want them to improve. And so I'm going to just meet them where they're at and help them along.
Is acknowledging that you've only been in the position for a few months, but is this a position that you imagine will be will spread outside of Utah and be adopted by other states? Have you had discussions about that with people outside, with governments outside Utah?
Yes, I've been speaking to my counterparts in other states, although they have very different scopes than I do. We are definitely learning from each other. This is, I think, a growing role. I think that it is an investment, because we all know that ransomware is on the rise, and the biggest risk is humans, is us. It's not really always a hacker in a hoodie trying to get into someone's system. It's just simply, not having a very secure network, or putting your password underneath your keyboard. Kind of simple things like that will need to change. So I think it's an investment. I think the return on investment is really high when you consider that most data breaches are caused by us, by humans. And so if I'm able to provide that kind of information and training and communicate that throughout the government, I think we're going to really save in the end with both reputation and perhaps pain of ransomware.
Does your so this is for the ABA antitrust section, and we're all familiar with the Federal Trade Commission and its privacy responsibilities. Does your role see you interacting with federal enforcers at all? And if so, what are those interactions?
Sure. Yes, because they're the different government entities, depending on where they are, they need to adhere to federal law, FERPA and HIPAA. As far as consumer privacy, that's something that's not in my scope. I'm not looking at consumer protection, although Utah did just pass a Consumer Protection Act just this month. That's really new. And so that's something we'll be looking at. I imagine there'll be at some time a federal change in that space, but that's not part of my scope.
Obviously the area of privacy law and practice is expanding ever more. And so, what advice do you have for young law students, lawyers? And I understand you're not a lawyer, so non-lawyers as well, for getting into this area and understanding it and maybe building a career.
I would say it is an ever-growing section of a topic, and that it's not easy. It's actually quite complicated, which is fun. I think it's going to become increasingly important with all of the surveillance that we have. It's going to be interesting to see what it means to have evidence just kind of in the public domain, what that interaction is with getting a warrant. There's fun laws on that. There's going to be an increasing adoption of technology. I don't see that going away. And with artificial intelligence, self-driving cars, with all of these new technologies coming, I would say that this is going to be never a dull moment.
Great. Whitney, Phillips, thanks for taking the time today. It was a pleasure speaking to you.
Nice to talk to you too.